Welcome, Sens Talk.
Russell winds in, feeds it back across the strike, and scores! Brady Tkachuk makes it 2-0. Claude Giroux, hit alone, scores!
Tim Stutzock cross, Tkachuk score! The captain, Brady Tkachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go Sens, go! All right, we are joined here by David Foote, the voice of the Belleville Senators, to recap what was, frankly, a fantastic season for your Belleville Senators. David, great to have you back on. How are you doing?
I'll unmute myself. Thanks for having me, Brendan. Good to be here.
Wondered for a second there.
We're doing good. We're doing good. You know, the old end of the season's always kind of a strange time of year, especially up here in the office. It's like everything kind of ends pretty abruptly, and yet there's still a whole lot of work to do in terms of wrapping things up and getting set for next season. So, happy to take the time, man.
Yeah, what's it been like the last couple of days? Obviously, we're going to jump into the series. We're going to jump into the overall playoff run and everything. But what's the energy, the vibe around the team right now? And what still needs to be done behind the scenes before we get to the draft?
Yeah, it's pretty quiet for us right now. We had exit interviews yesterday, so the guys cleaned up. And for the most part, they're all headed out of town already. It doesn't take long. Once the season comes to an end, everyone's pretty pumped to get home and see their family.
Of course.
As obviously disappointed as they are that the season's over. But so pretty quiet. You know, the equipment guys are just doing some housekeeping downstairs. Up here in the office, we're just kind of wrapping up the season. I'm going through my analytics for the Belleville Sens Entertainment Network, that sort of thing. And then we'll start to pump out some year in review content and start getting set for the draft and rookie camp and all that other fun stuff that's coming up in the next couple months.
Love the rookie tournament. Do you know if it's going to be back in Belleville, by the way? I might as well just ask now because, it's great to see. I think it was last year or 2 years ago that it was in Belleville. So just wondering if it's going to be back there.
Yeah, I don't know. I know Buffalo has been the spot for the last few years. And then obviously Traverse City, a bunch of teams go up to Michigan for that tournament. So I'm not sure if we're going to have anything here in town. I would imagine we'll be in Buffalo again in September. And then development camp will be obviously out in Ottawa probably in a few weeks or a month or so.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. We have a lot of hockey to talk about that just happened. So we'll focus on that for now. Obviously, we opened the series with a huge victory over the Toronto Marlies in a 3-game series. Took them down in Game 3 in overtime. Garrett Poulin, overtime winner. Probably the biggest goal in Belleville Senator history. To the second round we go. Fantastic Game 1. Took care of business. Really showed Cleveland why we, were in that second round. We deserve to be there. And then the next 3 games we would lose. But, Cleveland and Belleville battled. I mean, one of those games, game number 3 was a double overtime loss, for example. It was a tough, hard-fought series. So, David, kind of walk us through what happened in that series, what went right, what went wrong, and what really stood out to you.
Yeah, and again, to put this all in the grand perspective, Senators went 3-4 in the playoffs. 3 of their losses were in overtime. They only had 2 games that were more than more than 1 goal differential. They won 3-1 against Toronto in the first game of the playoffs. They lost 3-1 at Cleveland, which was 2-1 with an empty netter in the last game of the playoffs. So, point being, this team was about as close as you could possibly get to advancing, to moving on, to knocking off the top team in the North Division in the Cleveland Monsters. They were right there with Toronto, obviously, in all 3 games, with Cleveland in all 4 games. And, if you want to ask what went wrong, I know Dave Bell will say that, maybe there were some lapses here and there that could have potentially prevented things. But for me, sitting in the booth and watching the games, it really did seem like one of those cases where Belleville just wasn't getting the bounces. And I know it sounds like an excuse, and nobody's, here to make excuses. Nobody's happy that the season is over. But if you look at especially that last game against Cleveland, where Levi Marilainen comes in, he hasn't played in basically 3 weeks. He's ice cold. He's incredible in the game, keeps the Senators in it. But, the first goal of the game comes inside 2 minutes, and it's a wrist shot that goes off the stick of a defender, flies way up in the air. There's a little bit of interference in the crease, arguably, with Levy, and the puck skips past him and in the net. The second goal was a hard pass out of the corner, off a skate, and in. Like, they weren't getting beat by clean goals, right? It was all very much bounces and redirections and things that you end up not having a lot of control over, even if you are in the right position to start the play. So I think it really was a little bit of luck, working against the Senators. Because you can't fault their effort, you can't fault the work ethic, you can't fault the way that they battled through 72 games, let alone those 7 playoff games. So it comes down to some unfortunate bounces.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it yourself. That game 4, I mean, Levi Merlinan, we'll talk about him and Sogard, and that tandem for next year, Kevin Mandolese as well, should be a part of that conversation. We'll talk about that in the next part of this conversation. Definitely want to talk about that. But, Garrett Palan, I mean, he hit the post once. They hit the post at least 3 times in the final third period. I mean, the bounces, I know it sounds cliche. Belleville did everything. They dominated the final period of the season. They just couldn't beat, Jack Greaves. He was fantastic, no?
Yeah, outstanding. And what a story, just to take a moment for Jack Greaves. He's from Cambridge, so, Western Ontario kid. Undrafted in the OHL, ends up putting us some pretty good numbers with the Barrie Colts. Still undrafted in the NHL, ends up getting a look from the Blue Jackets organization down in Kalamazoo in the ECHL. Plays well enough there to get a look in Cleveland. Plays well enough there to basically earn himself a 2-year NHL deal. So this kid's no joke. He's little, he's mobile, he's reactive, and against Belleville, he's incredible. So and again, like, you'll hear some people say, well, you can't just blame it on running into a hot goaltender all the time. But in this case, if you watched all 4 games of the series, you would see how close they were, and goaltending and some bounces, I think, made the difference. And that's not to say that Belleville's goaltending was bad by any means.
And look, when we previewed the second round for Cleveland, you and I both said that the goaltending would be the key deciding factor of the series. And you said it yourself. Sogard was, I'm not going to say he stole the series by any means, but he wasn't the reason they lost. He was okay. Levi Merlinan stood on his head, frankly, in that first playoff appearance for him of his pro career in North America. But when you're going up against a guy like Jack Greaves, who's literally stopping everything, and when he's not stopping something, it's in the post. I mean, you're not going to be able to beat a team like Cleveland, who has so much offensive power as well. So unfortunately, what really just happened is they got beat by a good goaltender. I mean, that's what happened. We knew that was going to be the case going into the series. One of the teams were going to have a goalie that was going to steal the show because both teams were able to score, and that's what happened. You said it yourself. Even game 4, where we lost 3-1. I mean, all the games otherwise were 1-goal games. They were in those games. They were fighting. They were battling, and the goaltending was just better on their end. And that was expected going into the series. And unfortunately, that's what happened. But obviously, on the note of goaltending, I mean, we mentioned how Levi Merlinan started game 4. That wasn't because Matt Sogard was bad. Now he wasn't, standing on his head by any means, but he wasn't bad. He was all right. He did deal with an injury. Now, I don't believe it was disclosed. Do you know what the injury was per se? Or yeah, so.
No, and again, like all that we were told was that he wasn't 100%, and that's really all we know, and likely all we will find out now that the season is done. But and I mean, nothing should be taken away from Mads either. I mean, if you watch the overtime goal in Game 3, it looked like maybe he might have missed the post sliding across to his right, and that kind of left an empty net. Like, there's some little things here and there, but. And as much as Jack Greaves was one of the main reasons that Belleville won, I think you tip your cap to him. You tip your cap to the Monsters as a group, and to their coach, Trent Vogelhuber, who's been doing an outstanding job with that team since taking over as the head coach there. So, some bad bounces, a really good team. And hey, it's playoff hockey, right? Like, that's what happens.
That's exactly what happens. I mean, look, once again, I'm not saying Matt Sogard was the reason we lost. Definitely not. But as you mentioned, that overtime one where he slid, there was a couple of weird ones there where it just kind of, I'm not going to say screwed him over, but it was a weird bounce out of position, and that happens. It's playoff hockey. And of course, when it's playoff hockey, the lights are even more bright and people are going to take even more notice. So, if you look at his playoff stretch here, I'm just taking a look at the stats. I mean, overall, pretty solid, 910 save percentage, 246 goals against average. He played pretty solid. Gave Belleville a chance to win nearly every single night. And same can be said for Levi Merlinan, who frankly deserved better in that game 4. So, that's a solid tandem going into next year. It's a young tandem. Obviously, both might be battling for a potential backup spot next year with the Ottawa Senators as well. And we have to include Kevin Mandolese in this conversation too. This is a guy with immense potential who should absolutely be part of the conversation. But how do you see the goaltending shake up going into next year? And who do you think is the starter going into next year?
Well, tough to say. I mean, you mentioned Ottawa. I think we have to remember that Matt Sogard is in a contract year this year. Kevin Mandolese is also in a contract year this year. So the only goaltender for, Belleville fans anyway to look at from their perspective as a possibility right now is Levi Meralainen. Now, I would assume they'll try to lock up Matt Sogard. I'm not sure on Kevin Mandolese. He's done a lot of good service for this club in his
For sure.
4 years so here. So he's obviously an option, and whether it's Levy and Mandolese, whether it's Levy and Matt, I think Belleville's going to be in a good spot either way. But I do think that if Sogard extends, and puts up a good camp, like he's right in the discussion, obviously, for a backup role in Ottawa, especially with this added experience that he's got now playing some playoff games in the AHL, because he didn't go up to Ottawa as much as he needed to last season. So, which is probably good for him. He's able to be steady and stay down here.
Yeah.
But I'd be looking at him as a potential option as a backup. And then for Levi Meralainen, I think next season will be that season in his development where he's going to get more of the crease. He's going to get more opportunity to play and to be the guy, much like he was for Kingston a couple seasons ago in the OHL. And it'll be a big year for him for sure. And really looking forward to watching him play, because he's just so calm and technically sound. And gave Belleville a chance to win that game in game 4 for sure.
For sure. And I mean, same with Sogard. I mean, they're both very young goalies. And people often, when they see goalies, in their early to mid 20s, they're like, oh, they should be ready already. Well, people always forget that goaltenders take far, far longer. I mean, best goalie in franchise history, Craig Anderson, didn't, really start his NHL career until he was like 30 or 29, right? When he came to Ottawa from Colorado. So he had a couple of good years there, right? But he really took off here in Ottawa. So goalies, they take some time. And the fact that we're seeing such maturity, of course, like you just said, from these goalies, they look very calm, but also the numbers are pretty encouraging as well. These are two very, very solid goalies, and the future is certainly bright for them. So whether they're in Belleville, whether they're in Ottawa, it's good to see that Belleville, at the very least, has a good starter there in Levy and potentially in Sogard as well. Hopefully it's not a severe injury there for Sogard, but luckily he's got a few months here to recover. On the topic of guys staying, leaving, we just found out the other day that Lassie Thompson, longtime Ottawa Senator, former first-round pick, was unfortunately going to be leaving now. He's going to be going over back to Sweden in the SHL, I believe. So what do you think about that? Lassie Thompson was a fantastic player for Belleville, had some good stints in Ottawa, showed some good glimpses, but unfortunately just couldn't consistently put it all together.
Yeah, and the say he's an RFA, right? So the Sens will still have his rights if they do potentially out of nowhere basically come up with a deal. They could technically lure him away from Europe again, but he's got something signed, at least that he's got something set, and that in all likelihood, and based on the reporting that you've obviously seen elsewhere, it does seem like that's the way it's going. It's a tough loss for the Senators. I think our fans here in Belleville will be upset to see him go, because he's been one of those mainstays for us here, playing every day, top 2 pairing guy, always kind of impactful, exciting to watch at times when he gets the puck and starts rushing up the ice. So I think our fans here will be a little bit upset to see him go. But that said, the blue line is pretty deep still here in Belleville. We saw Donovan Sabrango take some huge steps in the playoffs, and he'll be really comfortable settling back in here. Not to mention Thomas Hamara, who could end up in Kitchener again as an overager next year, or could be here in Belleville getting a crack at pro. There'll be a couple of holes to fill with, guys like Montemapalo and McKinnon are out of contract this year. Jacob Larson is out of contract this year, and Max Gannett is out of contract this year. So a lot of holes to fill, but some good prospects already here, and obviously something that I'm sure Steve Staios and his team will look at come draft time in terms of what holes they need to now fill in the organization's stockpile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned some of those names there. I mean, Madden Paulo, for example, was brought over here from Europe last offseason. A guy like that, Igor Sokolov as well, Garrett Pilon. I mean, there's a couple of guys here, of course, in the back end, but also in the forward core. Do you see a big roster turnover going into next year, or do you think a lot of these guys come back?
I mean, I think based on what I know and how involved or uninvolved I am in the process of player signings, etc. Um, I mean, there will be a bunch of turnover. Here's the players who are eligible to return for Belleville next year. Phil Daou, who was out basically the whole season hurt again. Roby Arvetti, who was out basically the whole season hurt. Tyler Clevin, who with a good camp could very well end up in Ottawa next year. He was unbelievable for Belleville this year in his rookie season. Levi Merolainen, Donovan Sabrango, Tyler Boucher, who was injured most of the season, Stephen Halliday, Zach Ostapchuk, Oscar Pedersen. That's it. Outside of those, like 8 to 10 players, nobody else is under contract for 2024-25. So I would love to see them bring back Garrett Pilon. I would love to see Matt Highmore come back. I would love to see Wyatt Bongiovanni come back. He was acquired at the trade deadline.
Josh Curry,
I mean, Josh Curry was
another one.
super underrated player this year. The oldest player on the roster, 31 years old. Wasn't really everyday impactful necessarily in the regular season, but come playoff time, he was right in the mix all the time. I would really like to see a handful of those veterans come back. I think they did a really good job in establishing a culture in the dressing room here and giving this club something that it hadn't really had in previous seasons in the AHL, just a good stable of American League veterans. And I think it paid off. I mean, we interviewed just about every player yesterday, and we'll have some of those rolling out on our socials and through the Belleville Sens podcast. But to a man, pretty well everybody said this is the tightest group I've ever played with in my career. A couple of guys said this is the most fun I've ever had playing hockey in my career. And I know a lot of guys will say that at the end of the season, and it can be a little bit cliche, but it seemed genuine. And I really did see it throughout the course of the season. So those veteran guys, as impactful as they can be on the ice, are so important off the ice as well. And I really do hope that Ryan Bonus and company take a look at some of those guys and bring them back again.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we literally just had the best season of our franchise history, right? I mean, it makes sense that you want to have some of those veteran guys back. I mean, you watch this team play. I've said this many times, and I've had some critiques of the big club, pardon me, up here in Ottawa, where they don't really play in unison or as a team. They play as individuals. Complete opposite in Belleville. They play as a team, and that's why they're so effective in their forecheck. They're relentless. That's why they get a lot of offensive opportunities, because they're able to force turnovers off of the opposing team. So definitely want to bring back some of those veterans, some really, really talented guys. And, Garrett Pilon, Igor Sokolov especially. I mean, that's a guy that is a fan favorite here and in Belleville. So hopefully these guys are brought back. We'll see what happens with that. I wanted to ask you, David, who stood out to you the most in this playoff run? I mean, Sabrango, you mentioned, he was fantastic stepping in for Captain Hetherington. Of course, Stephen Halliday, the disher, as the Locked On guys say, absolute beauty. This guy was unbelievable. Who really stood out to you, though?
In the playoff run specifically, or all season?
Both. Why not both?
All right. Playoff run, Stephen Halliday obviously led the team in points, was among the top scoring players in the Calder Cup playoffs before Belleville went out, was the top scoring rookie in the Calder Cup playoffs before Belleville went out. For a guy to come in and play like less than 20 games near the end of the season, to join the team while they're already on that kind of stretch run and fighting and pushing to qualify for the playoffs, and to just slide in as seamlessly as he did and be as impactful as he was certainly my standout for Belleville over the course of those 7 games in the playoffs. And I've got a couple for the regular season. Tyler Clevin really surprised me. I knew about him obviously coming in, but I hadn't seen him play much outside of some clips here and there. So just the way he, again, was, as a first-year player, able to step in and play huge minutes and lay punishing body checks and not be afraid to tangle with anybody. I thought he had an outstanding year. Zach Ostapchuk was our Rookie of the Year this year. Again, 20 years old, steps in, scores some big goals, wins a lot of faceoffs, really contributed to the offense of the club. And then we mentioned him a little bit earlier, but Nicholas Montempallo. I was extremely impressed with Nicholas Montempallo this year for similar reasons that I was with Tyler Clevin. And I guess, Montempallo gets a little bit more benefit because he's played pro longer. But he was just, for a guy who's adjusting to a new continent, new league, new rink dimensions, the whole deal. I just thought he was so good and among our plus-minus leaders all season long. So those would be a few of the standouts for me.
Yeah, I'll say right now, I mean, him, Jacob Larson, and Dylan Hetherington, these are guys that you want to keep around. They're veterans, they're effective, they're experienced, and they play very, very strong hockey. Obviously, you got some prospects coming up in the wings, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just the only thing with the veteran thing as well, like as much as we want to have all these guys back, I think we also have to remember that the American Hockey League does have a veteran rule, which you can only dress 6 players who've played more than, I always get the number wrong, it's around 270 pro games or something like that. So
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, so like you can have as many as you want on the roster. You can only have 6 in the lineup. So when you've got guys like Highmore and Curry and Boko, and European games count. So like Yuri Smekel counted as a veteran already because he's played 300 games overseas. You start, Hetherington, Larson, you start mixing them all in and you realize, well, all these guys aren't going to be able to play every night. So there's going to have to be decisions made one way or another. Either we don't include them on the roster or they are, and they're just going to have to sit a lot. So just something to keep in mind when we're talking about the veteran guys that we hope to see back, because there will unfortunately be some decisions that have to be made on that front.
Absolutely. I appreciate that footnote. I mean, I didn't know that, to be honest with you. I do appreciate that, though. I didn't know that. So definitely something to keep in mind, especially when you got a lot of guys, like you said, needing contract extensions and you have all these prospects coming up in the wings. We already spoke about the positives. We kind of spoke about what happened. We kind of reflected on the negatives of the playoff run. But overall, what is the key takeaway for Belleville and the culture and the organization and everything from this playoff run going into next year?
I'm going to go back to what Dave Bell told me in our I guess, post-season scrum at the end of game number 4. He just said, more than anything else, we've laid the groundwork here in Belleville with the Senators AHL affiliate that the playoffs is the bar. Like, that was the goal this year, but missing the playoffs becomes unacceptable. And next season, it's not just about getting in. We're expected to get in. We're trying to change the perception of this team to one that you don't want to play against. You don't want to see the big B come up on the calendar because you don't want to have these guys come in and run you out of your own building. You don't want to have to come to CAA Arena and play because you're going to get beat up. And, that's kind of the type of reputation that they did start getting through the season. And I think, culturally and as an organization, I think the biggest thing is just that this has to be the standard now. It's no longer about going through the motions and hopefully doing enough to make the playoffs. It's about being a winning team, carrying that on through the regular season over 72 games into the playoffs, and getting these prospects as much success in the postseason and as much experience as we can. So I think that's it. It's we're no longer that team that's that they're probably going to finish 6, 7. Maybe they squeak in at 5. That's not going to be acceptable anymore.
Well, a lot of expectations on the entire Sens organization going into next year. Let's just say that, and we'll leave it off with that. I mean, that's the perfect way to put it off. What do you think?
It's going to be a fun off season. There's going to be a lot of change. I'm really intrigued to see what happens because, again, as much as I work for the club, I'm around, I'm kind of involved. I end up seeing a lot of the same stuff, the same as you guys do, the same as the fans do. I'm watching just as interested as everyone else to see what happens, and then we react from there. So yeah, it's going to be a huge off season for the club, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what Steve Staios and Ryan Bonus and Sean McCauley and everybody else can put together here, both in Ottawa and in Belleville, with now another season under their belts, and for the GM an off season in charge, which obviously he didn't have to start this year.
So yeah, a lot of changes for sure, no doubt. We'll definitely be taking a look at the Belleville Sens Entertainment Network for our latest updates. But speaking of that, David, let us know where we can listen to you, follow you, and everything in between.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Footy on the Air. Obviously, the Belleville Sens are at Belleville Sens. The season's done, but we did, again, about 20 exit interviews yesterday. So our plan is to continue to roll the Belleville Sens podcast for the next 6 weeks or so. Once a week, we'll get you a couple of interviews with some of the players. We'll get you some breakdowns on their seasons. A little bit of coverage on what's still happening in the Calder Cup playoffs, because obviously they're still going. And then as we move into July, hopefully it's free agent signings and roster news and all that fun stuff. So BellevilleSens.com for all the details. You can tune in directly. Well, I guess that doesn't matter anymore because we don't have live broadcasts. But podcasts available wherever you get yours, Spotify, iTunes, Google, you name it. You can find the Belleville Sens podcast there.
Well, always appreciated. We'll definitely have you on again soon. But we'll definitely be staying updated on all thing Belleville Senators with the Belleville Sens Entertainment Network. David, once again, thank you so very much for joining the show. We'll have to have you on again soon. But till then, take care. We'll talk soon for sure.
Yeah, you too, Brandon. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. Take it easy.